All right, so the question is, what's the sign of f in between here and here? All right, that's very confusing, isn't it? So here's what they're asking is, in between -7/3, so -7/3, it's weird that that fraction line isn't there. But anyway, -7/3 is over here. That's -2.3, repeating. That's what that would be as a decimal. And -3/5, which would be -0.6 exactly. It's saying in between here and here, what is the sign of the graph? Is it something like this, where it's always positive? Choice A. Is it always negative? Or does it go up, come back down? Is it both? Is it something like that, or maybe something like this? Okay. The reason we can say in between these two is because what they're telling us is right here, these are all of the zeros, right? Zeros. That's where the graph touches the x-axis. That's what a zero is, right? So here we go. Right now we know that the zeros are on those spots. So -5 way over here, -7/3. And if you don't know what -7/3 is, use a calculator, right? Just figure it out. You could also just divide like a boss, right? Anyway. And then -3/5 is here. And then 2. So what's happening is the graph will look something like this. It's going through all of these points somehow. Sometimes, though, the graph will bounce like that. And we'll talk about that in the next thing we're going to do. But what we don't know is in between these two numbers, where is the graph? Is the graph above? Is it positive? Or is it below? Negative. All right. So here's what we're doing. Let's talk about in between these two, right? So in between these two is what the only thing we're interested in now. So what's in between -7/3? Well, that's -2.3, repeating, and -0.6. Give me a number in between those two, somebody. -1. Awesome. Try to pick the simplest number you can think of, right? -1 is a real simple. What we're going to do is we're going to say, all right, -1 is in between here. We know that the graph is either always above or always below on this one, because if it crossed over again, wouldn't there be another zero in between? Yeah, there would be, but there's not. They tell us these are the two zeros. So because I wrote them out in order like that, we can say that for sure. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to plug in -1. We chose -1 because it's in between these two. So if I plug in -1 into all of this, it might look very frightening at first, but let me show you kind of a shortcut. All right, so plugging in -1, what's 5 times -1 plus 3? -2, right? So that's a negative number. I don't even care what kind of negative number. I just know that it's negative. Okay, plug in -1 here. -1 minus 2. Is that a positive number or a negative number? Negative. 3 times -1 plus 7. That'd be 4, wouldn't it? So that's a positive. And then what about this last one? -1 plus 5. That's 4, right? Which is a positive number. So here's why I do that. When they list the function like this with all these things right by each other, what are they doing to each other? Are they multiplying each other or adding each other? They're multiplying, right? So since they're multiplying, tell me what I get when I multiply a negative times a negative. Positive, don't I? So those two turn into a positive. And then what do I get if I take that positive and I multiply it by two other positives? It's positive. That's why we can choose A. Again, we can choose that because there's only one spot to check. These two are right by each other. Now, here's the problem with this. Not every one of these questions will have just the one spot to check. Sometimes you have to check multiple intervals. All right, so let's try this one. Here's the graph right now. Here's negative 3.5. 3/7 is over here somewhere. And then 5 is way over here, right? My scale is way off. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. The question now is what's in between 3/7 and 5? Well, that's still just one spot to check, right? But let's pretend for a second. What if it said in between negative 3.5 and 5? How many different numbers am I going to have to plug in? I'm going to have to plug in 2 because look, this is one interval and this is another interval. I'm going to have to plug in 2 different numbers in 2 different spots. All right, so right here, this first one, I would choose something like 0. And I'm going to plug in 0. So let's plug in 0 real quick. 0 minus 5 right here. That's a negative, right? 0 times 2 plus 7. Positive. 0 times 7 minus 3. Negative. What would be the result there? That'd be a positive, wouldn't it? Negative times a positive times another negative. That'd be a positive number. So the graph would be here for this portion. Something like that. It's positive. It's above the axis. That's what that means. All right. The second part. What's in between 3/7 and 5? 4. Okay. Yeah. We can choose 4. That works. So let's choose 4. Plug in 4. 4 minus 5. That's negative, right? Okay. 4 times 2 plus 7. That's a positive. 7 times 4 minus 3. That's a positive. So now I get a negative times a positive times a positive. That's a negative, right? So what happens is the graph actually crosses over. It doesn't bounce like sometimes it might. The graph is actually crossing through here. So if I made the problem like I did here, I changed it, right? If I changed it to this, I would say this one. I might have to check multiple intervals, right? The result of these does not matter. The only thing that matters is whether they're negative or positive. Okay.